I want to take a few minutes on this video and talk about the philosophy of naturalism, and specifically what's wrong with it. I'll get to that in just a minute, but first, a definition. What is naturalism? One way to start would be to give a definition by one who identifies as a naturalist, namely a guy named Sean Carroll, who's a pretty prominent physicist. Here's what he says. Given a choice, I would always describe myself first as a naturalist, someone who believes that there is only one realm of reality, the material world, which obeys natural laws, and that we human beings are part of it. Atheism is ultimately about rejecting a certain idea, while naturalism is about a positive acceptance of a comprehensive worldview. Naturalists have a lot more work to do than simply rejecting God. They bear the responsibility of understanding how to live a meaningful life in a universe without built-in purpose. So that is a standard working definition and given by a pretty prominent scientist who self-identifies as a naturalist. Here's one way to put this in perspective in terms of how this came about and how this worldview came to be very prominent and popular. Think back to ancient times, say in the ancient Middle East, ancient Greece, well before there was anything remotely like what we consider to be modern science. Man walks out of his house in a thunderstorm and he sees lightning. Well, because human beings are incorrigible meaning seekers and explainers, he tries to explain and make sense of the phenomena that he observes. Well, in that state of scientific ignorance, he simply appeals to the only things that would make sense to him in his realm. So he says that Zeus must be angry and hurling lightning bolts or hurling javelins off the top of Mount Olympus, because it would make sense that if there were such a thing as a god, as say a 15-foot tall, indestructible human-like creature who lived on the top of a mountain, if he had javelins and hurled them to the earth, then they probably would look a lot like javelins. So in that state of scientific ignorance, that kind of explanation makes some sense. But of course, we now know a wide range, a vast body of information that he was ignorant of, namely about barometric pressure and contrasting warm and cold air masses and the nature of static electricity and things like that. So now, in light of our scientific knowledge, we no longer need to appeal to a supernatural explanation. All right, we have such a grasp, such a thorough and intricate knowledge of the natural world that we don't have a need to appeal to anything supernatural, anything above the natural world. And we could go on all day with different examples. You might think also of, say, a medical issue like epilepsy. Well, before there was any knowledge of the way the brain works, of synapses and various lobes and parts of the brain, well, when someone falls down and shakes and foams at the mouth, it goes unconscious and unresponsive, and yet their body still moves and gyrates. Well, it would make sense if there were such a thing as evil demons or spirits and they took a person over, that's probably what they would do. They would try to send the person in some sort of convulsion and harm him or her. Well, again, that makes sense in that state of scientific ignorance, but we now know the nature of epilepsy and we understand certain brain maladies, and we no longer need to appeal to a supernatural explanation. No longer needing to appeal to a supernatural explanation makes sense at a basic level, but what people a lot of times don't get is how far this goes in a full-fledged naturalist philosophy. And what I mean is this: if naturalism is taken lock, stock, and barrel, what it necessarily means is that absolutely everything is reducible to matter. A synonym for the philosophy of naturalism is materialism. All right, and that doesn't mean people who like to spend too much money at the mall. In philosophy, materialism is simply a synonym for naturalism. So it means that there is nothing, there is no reality that is not made of matter. All right, or you might say matter and energy. But again, a lot of people miss this because they say that naturalism makes sense. They say that they embrace it, and yet in another breath, they'll turn around and appeal to something that can't be reduced to matter. All right. Now, even at that point, that may not sound too scandalous or controversial, but the problems come when you begin to consider the implications of that. So here are a few problems with naturalism, and I'll save the one I think that maybe is most formidable and the one which really undermines the entire way of thinking. I'll save that one for last. But first of all, if you hold the idea that absolutely everything consists in some way of matter, is reducible to matter and energy, then morality of any kind has to be an illusion. And there's really no way around that. Now, of course, we don't experience this as an illusion. And when you experience an illusion, you experience it as something real. The nature of an illusion is that which is false. So the way you experience it is not true to the way the thing actually is. So here's what I mean in saying that morality would have to be an illusion. If everything's reducible to matter, matter by definition is amoral. Right? Pieces of matter, atoms, can't be wrong or right, good or evil. They can't be virtuous or invirtuous. They're just matter. Or inert matter is not something that belongs in a moral category. So think of it this way. Let's say you're in a chemistry lab and you have a tube of chemicals in one hand and a tube of chemicals in the other. And you want to do an experiment, and there's an empty vat in the middle. You want to pour the two chemicals into the vat and see what happens when they mix. So you do it. You stand back, you watch the reaction. They begin to bubble up and foam and swirl. And in response to what you see in the vat as the chemicals swirl, you say, "Oh, that's horrible. That's just wrong." Well, that would be an absurdity. Chemicals can't be right or wrong. It would be nonsense to have a response of moral indignation to a chemical reaction, because chemicals are just that. They're chemicals. They're just matter. What this necessarily means is that anytime we have a moral conviction about anything, about child abuse, about rape, about political injustice, about exploiting the poor, whatever it may be, all that, again, because in the lights of naturalism, everything is reducible to matter. All of our convictions, if naturalism is an accurate view, all of our convictions about those things ultimately are just the results of chemical reactions. And ultimately, our conviction that it's wrong to exploit the poor, our conviction that it's wrong to rape someone, our conviction that those things are evil is no more or less significant. It's no more or less morally weighty than a burp or the fact that one day our bodies will die and decay into the ground. None of those has any moral significance according to the naturalist view. So if it is true, you have to face the fact that not that you don't experience moral convictions, but that those convictions don't correspond with anything that's real. They're just illusions. They're just swirling chemicals in your brain. And likewise, anytime we talk about loving another person, love, as is the case with morality, must be, according to naturalism, something that is only the product of a chemical process. A chemical process typically explained in terms of a blind, accidental, unguided process of evolution. So here's a way to put that in perspective. Imagine this. Say there's a girl and a guy, and they meet, and they have an attraction to each other, and they begin to date casually. And then they move maybe just to the next step. They're not serious yet, but they're a little bit past the casual dating phase, but still just in the process of getting to know each other. Okay, they go to a party together. Okay, they go to a party, and the guy has, let's say, a lapse in judgment. He drinks way too much, and he gets totally hammered, sloppy drunk out of his mind. Well, they walk out of the party. They go out into the front of the house, and he turns to the girl, and he looks at her as much as he can stay focused. He looks at her, and he says, "I want you to know I love you." Well, the question is, does his statement have any meaning to the girl? Does that hold any weight with her? Now, I'll say, just in light of my own personal experience, that I don't think I've ever in my life met a woman to whom that statement would be meaningful. Because she would know, as we often say, he doesn't mean it. It's just the alcohol talking. His statement has no meaning. It has no significance because it's not from him. It's just from the chemicals swirling in his brain. Well, if that's the case, if naturalism is the case, I should say, then everything we ever say is only the result of chemicals swirling in our brain. In the analogy I just posed, the chemical is alcohol. But you could choose quite a number of other chemicals that, again, have come about within our brain chemistry through a blind, accidental, unguided process of evolution. And by the same principle, everything that comes out of our mouth, every point of communication, the content of every statement that we ever make to another person is, just as with the drunk guy on the front lawn, just a result of chemicals in our brain. So you have to give up on love and you have to give up on morality being things that actually correspond with reality. And we could add to the list, you also have to give up on free will. If everything is reducible to matter, well then, you can't get a will from inert matter. And that means that everything you do, every word that you say, every decision that you make, every time you move your arm or your leg, this is only the outcome of neurochemical processes which have come about through a blind, accidental, unguided process. So there's really no such thing as me doing this. There's no such thing as you choosing to do that. There's just chemicals doing what chemicals do, because everything is reducible to matter and energy. All right, so if naturalism is an accurate view, morality, love, and individual will, all these are illusions and ultimately hold no more significance than any other bodily function that we experience on a daily basis. All right, so there are some things that are really problematic with naturalism. Those are certainly some strong reasons to suggest that it is not a sound worldview, and it is quite deficient on a number of points, unless we're okay with embracing the idea that morality, love, and free will are illusions. All right, lastly, here's the thing that I would go so far as to say is the thing. This should cause people to abandon naturalism as a philosophy, just as people should abandon the idea that the world is flat. And I say that because naturalism itself entails an inherent contradiction. One very prominent scholar, philosopher, who has articulated this very well among a number of other people, but in recent times, one person whose name is well known with this particular criticism is Alvin Plantinga. And he writes a book called Where the Conflict Really Lies, in which he argues that the real problem is not between, say, evolution and religious belief. The real problem is between evolution and naturalism. So it's a fascinating thesis, and if you want to hear more of what he says about that, check out that book. But here's the central problem. Okay, if naturalism is true, okay, premise number one, everything, as I've said, everything is reducible to matter. There is no reality that is not made of matter. All right, number two, all configurations or relationships of different material properties have come about through a blind, unintentional, accidental, unguided process. Okay. Three, 100% of all of our knowledge comes through our brains. Because, in light of premise 1 and 2, everything is made and reducible to matter. Our brains are made 100% of matter. And because all configurations of matter have come about through an accidental, unintentional, unguided process, our brains have come about through an accidental, unintentional, unguided process, and therefore our brains, like all matter, have no truth-bearing properties. Okay, so matter, again, just as I said earlier that matter is inert, it has no moral qualities. Matter by itself, a piece of wood, a rock, a current of electricity, these things can't be good or evil, right or wrong. They're amoral. Well, by the same principle, matter has no truth-bearing properties. All right, you would worry very seriously, I hope, about a person who had to make a really important decision and really needed some wisdom and insight and wise guidance in his or her life. And if that person went out in their backyard and picked up a tree limb and put it to their head and said, "Oh, please tell me the right way." Right? Well, obviously that person needs some help because matter has no truth-bearing properties in and of itself. Well, if naturalism is true, then our brains are 100% matter. Our brains have come about by an accident, essentially, and therefore have no truth-bearing properties, and therefore the thing on which we rely for all of our true beliefs itself has no truth-bearing properties. So matter can't convey truth. The brain is 100% matter, but then the brain is the thing on which we depend to understand and to know the truth. Therefore, we can't know the truth. Therefore, we shouldn't trust any of our beliefs, and one of them being naturalism. So in that sense, naturalism falls in upon itself. Another way to put it is that if naturalism is true, then there's certainly no way for us to know that naturalism is true, nor is there any way for us to know that anything else is true, because we simply don't have a capacity to form true beliefs in light of accurate information. Sheer matter can't do that for you, and our brains are sheer matter. So there are some thoughts on naturalism, a little bit of explanation of what it is and what's wrong with it. Feel free to put in some comments and discussion in the comments below. And I will be back on soon with another video on another topic. Thanks.